You know, when we think about that golden era of the Belle Époque, the turn of the century, we tend to focus on Paris specifically and the cultural boom that was happening within the borders of the capital itself. And of course, we know it was a time of prosperity and partying and cabarets and champagne and all these great advancements in art and science and technology. But what also was happening during the turn of the century was another huge boom simultaneously, but far beyond the borders of France. It's because the French, after many generations of starts and stops and stutters, they had finally started gaining serious ground in the game of colonial expansion. And it wasn't just enough back then to colonize these exotic foreign lands, but of course you had to remind the world of just how big and diverse your empire was getting. So that's why we're here today for episode 89. It's because we're going to walk today through some of the direct evidence of that phenomenon of when France, about 100 years ago, started to bring its colonies here to Paris to put them on display. Thanks everybody. Episode 89. Thank you so much for joining me, whether you are live viewers. I assume my live viewers are there, even though I can't quite see my screen yet, but you're usually there around this time, so thank you for joining me in real time. Or if you're watching on the replay, thank you as well out there in the distant future somewhere. I hope the distant future is looking bright. So let's get started. I'm going to go around. My cameraman called in sick today, so I'm going to have to do everything myself, believe it or not, for this episode. And of course, if you didn't get that joke, then you must be brand new to this series, so welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So let's check in with everybody. I can see we got some live viewers here already. Hello, Lisa Parker and Ricky and Leslie. So let me show you where we are today. We're in the Bois de Vincennes, which is, you may already know, to the east of Paris. You can see in the upper left corner is the center of town, center of Paris, and we're beyond the border. And this is that odd thing where if you're in the Bois de Vincennes, you are geographically outside the city, but technically inside. You can see around the center of your screen it says the 12th arrondissement. So this is technically considered part of Paris, the Bois de Vincennes. And you can see I've circled here the section where we are. We're just about as far east as we can possibly be in the park. And it's called the Garden of Tropical Agronomy. Agronomy being the, I had to look this up too as well. Agronomy is the scientific study of agriculture and plants and the cultivation of these things. And so there are still laboratories and there's scientific research happening. And then let me show you the Google satellite view, because we are here and I circled all of the points of interest that are either leftovers from 100 years ago or things that have been added since, and they're all points of interest and interesting objects for us to ponder. And so we got our work cut out for us, but there are absolute hidden treasures through here. Hello everybody, it's great to see you. I see all of those bonjours coming in. Welcome to my live viewers, I appreciate that. So here we are, we're at the Jardin d'Agronomie Tropicale. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the Garden of Agronomie. So why are we here? We're here because I want to go back to the colonial expansion of France. You can see here this is 1885, and I'm just going to pull up a quick little animation. And it's going to jump from 1885 to 1914, and in that 30-year span, you're going to see that the colonies of France, which are of course in blue here, really exploded in that 30-year span. Look at that. So we got huge chunk of Northern Africa. We've got some of Southeast Asia there, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. And then if we fast forward a little bit further into the 1930s, you're going to see they bumped it up a little bit more. And this really represents the pinnacle or the epitome of the global colonization that France was part of up until about World War II. But then we're going to advance it one more slide, and you're going to see that by the 70s, France had essentially lost almost all of that. So it was a relatively short span, but the point of the story here, to catch us up to speed with what we're going to see, is that for that period of the turn of the century into the 70s, very big amounts of expansion, especially the first part of the 20th century. And what happened was France, of course, wanted to celebrate these colonies and show them off, as I mentioned in the intro here. So in Marseille, what they did was, let me pull this up. This is what happened in Marseille in 1906. This is an illustration that represents the grounds here. And you can see what they would do is they'd have these colonial expos, a sort of like a World's Fair to show off the various colonies of France. And it was part exhibit, part educational center, part amusement park, to be honest, and people would pay admission to go and learn about cultures and participate and see various things happening. And in 1907, the year after this one in Marseille, Paris wanted to follow suit. So they did. And you started to see advertisements like this. This was the Colonial Exposition, or the Colonial Expo of 1907 in Paris. And it was going to take place in this very section of the Bois de Vincennes where we are today. And you can see the idea was they'd use this vast space of the Parc of Vincennes, and each section of the forest would be a village, a reconstructed village that showcased a different colonized nation, complete with exotic architecture, indigenous peoples, food, animals, music, ceremonies. There were crafts that you could purchase. And people started seeing full-page advertisements like this, for example. The Tuareg of the Sahara, and you could literally come and see camels and elephants and all of that jazz. Now, I'd be remiss before we get started here if I didn't throw out a little bit of a disclaimer right off the bat, because whenever you talk about this Colonial Expo of 1907, there is a decidedly dark side to it. And basically, because the people, the indigenous peoples, were being shipped over here by the French and put on display, almost like, you know, objectified, like they were museum objects, and they would be asked to walk around and perform ceremonies and live in these temporary spaces for 6 months during the expo. And so it has been referred to this as the human zoo in a very derogatory manner, because, as I said, justifiably, the people back then were treated like animals to be viewed in a zoo. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because certainly I'm of the mind that you can enjoy history without necessarily glorifying or condoning any sort of behavior, but I also didn't want to gloss over it and ignore it, because there was that aspect, you know, and basically largely condemned not long after these colonial expos, because it just didn't seem very dignified for the indigenous peoples that were brought here to be gawked at. So I wanted to get that out of the way. I mean, I didn't want to be accused of ignoring that fact. It's a very complicated piece of history. But you know, we're all about discovery here, and I wanted to show you at least what is here in the history that's linked to this part of the Bois de Vincennes. So people flocked to this expo. This was the sort of floor plan that they would show you, the map that you would get when you paid to get in. And people did pay to get in 1907, by the way. The estimated 2.5 million visitors, which, to give you an idea of how extraordinary that was over the course of 6 months, that rivaled, or was even more than, the number of people that climbed the Eiffel Tower during its first World Fair in 1899. So major popularity. People were very interested and curious to experience these cultures. And so we're going to walk through a lot of this section today, and some stuff has survived, some not at all. But some structures remain, like this. And let's jump right into it. I should probably pop on my mask. This is a Chinese gate, authentic Chinese gate. It was actually, in the previous year, in 1906, it was used for an exhibit in the Grand Palais. And I happen to have an image of that, a postcard. So you can see it was beautiful and ornate and grand, and here it is under the Grand Palais glass ceiling. And then that was 1906, and then the next year they wanted to do this big Colonial Expo. And they installed it here. So this is the first installation here in the park. And it's, you know, there's a bit of sadness here because it's not nearly as pretty and ornate as it was well over 100 years ago. So you can see this is what it was before, and pop on the mask and we'll zoom in to see what it looks like now. So a lot of the decorative elements are gone, but it's still a very transporting, obviously exotic feel when you walk here, you know, very unexpected. You can see, for example, in these sections there would have been decorative elements attached all around. Lucienne says the faded pink tones are lovely. Yeah, it used to be more or less bright red. So that's what happened in 1907, and we'll see some evidence of that. But then a little bit later in World War I, they used this area for the military hospital, and specifically to treat wounded soldiers from the colonial territories. Colonial troops that were injured, and there was a hospital and a convalescence home in this area. And then in the 1920s, the area became commemorative. They started installing a lot of memorials to the fallen colonial soldiers of that period of World War I and even World War II. So we're going to see that as well. Today what we're going to see essentially is two different periods, leftovers from the 1907 Colonial Expo, and then from the 1920s when they installed, kids are having a good time, when they installed all of the memorials to the fallen soldiers. So let's go. Welcome everybody. Right here we have some remnants of some large statuary representing various nations. I believe this one is just a general allegory of spreading peace and liberty. Of course, that's up for debate whether these countries were spreading only that when they were colonizing. I mean, it's a touchy subject, of course. This is France, though. This represents France with the rooster. And I don't think, not so subtle allegory of the rooster being on top of the world, right? And all of the weaponry here at the base. These are 5 fragments of an older monument that was called "To the Glory of Colonial Expansion." Pardon. This is the Antilles, or representing it at least. And I like this detail here with the bananas. This is Asia here that I had to skip over because there was a little girl on it. So Asia, you can see some references to perhaps Buddhism. I don't want to overstep my expertise, but and then down here we have a fallen comrade. This was Africa, representing Africa. And I was wondering at first if she was meant to be laying down originally or if it fell, but then I looked at the pearls and you can tell that the pearls were originally meant to be on a standing person and not someone lying down. This is a beautiful perspective too that I was checking out before. Just really nicely done. So what you have here is essentially an outdoor gallery. And I've actually got a fair amount to show you today, so as usual, I got to keep some pep in my step. But this is just a few steps away from the Chinese gate. And let's move on. You can see some bamboo coming up here on the right. There's a lot of that, a lot of plantations and cultivations of them experimenting with the agriculture they were finding in those colonial areas. And as we come around the corner here, you can see there's quite a lovely structure. This is in the shape of a stupa, spelled S-T-U-P-A. A stupa is a traditional Buddhist structure often used to hold relics inside, or even in the cases of the very large ones, you can meditate inside them. And it represents a sacred mountain, or some say even represents Buddha himself being sat with his legs crossed here, and then this is his head, and then the spire is either the crown of Buddha or perhaps his enlightenment. But if we zoom in here, of course I want to show you the details. I don't know if you can make it out. We've got some symbols. Let me utilize my zoom capabilities here and see if you can see that. It's starting to rain on me here. There was about a 5% chance of rain, and we're getting all of it. In the front here, you can see, I don't know if you made it up, but there are some flowers. Because this is a memorial. In fact, this was not part of the original 1907 Expo. It says to the Cambodians and the Laotians, I believe that's how you say it. I haven't said that word too many times in my life, but yeah, Cambodians and Laotians who died for France. So we're going to see some examples of this, because after the Colonial Expo, which was rather controversial, and eventually they stopped doing it out of respect for the indigenous peoples. In the 1920s, they started to erect a lot of memorials. So that's why there's a duality here of, it's a place where bad things happened in one respect, but then a place where the French decided to pay homage and commemorate fallen soldiers. So that one's to the Cambodians and the Laotians. Oh, frankly got to take my mask off when there's no people around, because almost impossible to talk this much with a mask. Thank you, Lynn Pin, who just sent me a super chat donation. I always fail to remember to mention that at the beginning, but if anyone's live, they can click the $ next to the chat box and send me a quick tip. Always appreciated. So this is a bridge. And this is also very Cambodian in style. It's called the Pont Khmer, or the Pont des Naja. Naja refers to, in the Hindu and Buddhist faiths, or the beliefs, these beings were sort of half human, half snake. They were called the Naja, or the Najas. And they would reside, these strange beings would reside in the netherworld, as far as I understand it. Again, I don't want to overstep my expertise in the Buddhist faith. So there's that, and you can see things are in various states of disrepair. A lot of this stuff has been around for about a century, but it's just an absolutely transporting experience. Terry says, loving this on YouTube, watching it on the big screen. I'm glad. We definitely prefer YouTube for these sorts of things. And I'll give you another perspective. Now, we could cross that bridge, and there's some really good stuff beyond it, but there's another bridge here that I want you to see, so we're going to take a bit of a detour for that. So that is the style Pont Khmer, if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm going to trek our way here through the forest. Thank you, David Dubois, for that super chat. Appreciate it, buddy. Okay, so I think you can make this out. Got a little stream here, and another bridge called the Pont Tonkinois, the Tonkinese. I think that's how you'd say it. It was part of the 1907. Again, villages all here, one after the next. You would pay the admission to walk through and experience each culture as you walked. Let's cross that bridge. Try to make my way through here. thank you, my dear Sondra Hendrix. She just sent me a super sticker. That's very appreciated. Thanks, folks. I mean, this is essentially, nowadays especially, how I put food on the table and coffee in my cup, cafe creme in my coffee cup. Thank you, Ellen Betancourt. I appreciate that. So let's cross this bridge, or at least start to, and admire the views. More bamboo. I love me a good little bamboo forest. Apparently thrive here in France. I see it quite often in these types of tropical gardens. Thank you, Christina. Christina Consolet is reminding our Patreon members that the book club that some of you are part of is going to have their discussion on Zoom today. So if you're following along with the latest book club book with Christina Consolet, you should know that after this at 12 p.m. Eastern, there will be a discussion. Crossing this bridge, and you can already see in the distance there's a little something going on. And that's pretty intriguing stuff. We're going to see that in a moment. But I want to turn back toward this bridge because I have another image to show you. So I want to match up the perspectives, sort of like that. Because this bridge, just like the Chinese gate that we saw, was a little bit prettier originally. So I wanted to give you a feel for that. So note you had these, I don't know, are those dragons or seahorses on the right-hand side, beautiful. In fact, I think I read that they were fish, ceramic fish that adorned the top of those pillars. So not quite as ornate, but hey, I'm not going to cry over it. We're still very lucky to have these little quiet moments. Dawn says, imagine being a 10-year-old and being able to explore this. Yeah. I'm going to be bringing my girls here because now that I'm more familiar with what it is, I told my wife we got to bring our kids here. This is, believe it or not, I had to look it up because it's hard to tell from just looking at it. It's an old tiger trap. So it's part of this particular village in the expo. It, somehow how you trap tigers. Clearly you can see here there's I'd say a rather exotic hunk of wood. There you go, Dawn. There's something for the 10-year-old kids to play with, right? Tiger trap. Somehow that has survived these 113 years. What's also survived, at least sort of, is this. This is a small, sort of a model-sized pagoda. And it could have been used to hold relics, burn incense for worship. I'm going to show you an original from the expo where people were worshiping. So let me zoom in, I'll show you. It almost feels to me like it could be a lantern, but I'm just a dumb old Westerner. I don't really know what I'm looking at half the time with these things, but it's so lovely that even from 1907, some of this detail has absolutely survived. Allison's asking how you send stickers. Well, Allison, if you're logged into your YouTube account, which you must be because I see your name, next to where you're typing in comments, there should be a $sign. And if you click on it, you can send a super chat or a sticker. Choose a sticker that you want. So you know me by now, if you followed along, that I'm addicted to this idea of discovery in Paris, of how it just reveals itself to you in a very slow manner. And this space for me really represents that. Look at these Chinese characters, if you can make that out. Rick says a tiger trap is for equestrians, it's a horse jump. Okay, so maybe they weren't trapping tigers? Did I just totally miss the boat on that one? Were they jumping horses here instead? I'm gonna have to look into that. I like when I can learn stuff during these tours as well. Okay, let me show you that image that I came across. This is the same structure in Vietnamese worshippers, because we're getting very close to a lot of Vietnamese structures here. Thank you, Ennis, for that super sticker, and Kimberly sent me a super chat as well. You're all so lovely and supportive. Really appreciate it. And I hope you're enjoying this peaceful walk. Again, there's a real dichotomy here, because I don't want to be accused of ignoring it, that the Colonial Expo was, in the long run, considered to be a rather inhumane affair, at least bringing those indigenous people over here and having them perform and almost be, you know, like zoo animals. And it has been referred to as the human zoo. In fact, I recommend, if you're familiar, not familiar with my friend Messi Nessie Chic, a handful of years ago on her blog, she did a beautiful article, or a well-made article, on the human zoo of Paris, and it talked about the darker side of this expo. But today we're here just for the exploration and showing you what is on show still today, and what this area can offer, just for the visuals and whatnot. See folks saying that it's freezing up. Well, if the replay is really bad, what I'll do is I'll just upload the hard copy. So don't worry, I mean, you will eventually get a good version. You can see what's happening here. There are people there, and so I don't want to bother them, but this was my thumbnail, this beautiful. I think we've got a connection here. So apologize for that, but I'm going to continue, because maybe I'll just upload the video. I'll upload the replay later. So this is a beautiful little temple, but it wasn't the original for the expo. This was the original, and it was enormous. It took up that whole plot of land. And it was essentially a communal home built by artisans in Vietnam and shipped over to France for a couple of different expos. And by the time it got here in 1907, it was used for a tea room and a restaurant. And it was vast, and it had niches inside and objects from afar, and it was very, very popular. It was destroyed by a fire, sadly, but then this temple installed, and essentially acts as a memorial. It was installed in honor of the Vietnamese soldiers and all of the soldiers from French Indochina. So it's dedicated to them. And this structure we'll get to in a moment. Pop them here to be safe. So I'm probably going to bother a couple of these gents, but I just wanted to give you the full view of this. Beautiful. Now, before the larger structure was burned down, that Vietnamese communal home, it needed to have a guardian, its own guardian. So they decided around in the 1920s to build a guardian's residence right here, so that he or she could keep track of the property here, the premises. And they decided for the guardian's home to put this grand portico, this beautiful entrance that was meant to be an homage to the great Vietnamese palaces. C'est bon, allez-y, merci. Everyone says it's buffering, that's all right. So I will probably be uploading the replay separately. I knew the cell would be a little spotty out here. This here, the central octagon, is an allegory to the harmony of elements. So the center here was meant to, before the mosaics were stripped off, meant to represent the duality of the world, sort of a yin and yang. And then the 8 sections of the octagon around represented various elements of the universe, things like earth and fire and air and water and the mountains and thunder, things like that. This is a funerary urn. adds to it, and I wanted to show you some of the details. Just to give you an idea of some of this is absolutely in ruins. If we peek above this door here, you can see things grown in and boarded up. And the roof has seen better days, but this was the guardian's residence. We can also take another peek through here. So yeah, pretty rough. Maybe one day it'll be restored. But it still adds to the, at least when you back up like this, it's pretty spectacular visually. So this was not technically part of the expo. This was installed in the 1920s when a lot of those memorials to the soldiers, like that Cambodian one we saw, when those were installed. We'll see another view of this temple, this memorial, in a moment. Quite a substantial memorial here. Once again, arrived in the 1920s after the expo, and this one is, we zoom in, for the natives of French Indochina, or the Christian Indochinans, or the Indochinese maybe is how you would say it. Died for France, of course, La France. And it's quite a substantial, as I said, structure. So French Indochina, generally Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, a part of Southeast Asia. But again, you walk through here the first time and you think, be Paris. When they installed this memorial that we're on now, they intentionally put it right along the axe, or the axis of the Cambodian one. So there's a logic there. Oh, thank you, Lynn Pins. She says, I love all the research you do. I very much appreciate that. Julia says, I wish it wasn't, or Julia says, I wish it wasn't buffering so bad. That's all right. If it's buffering, just come back. I'll upload the nice crisp replay, the hard copy, if I have to. Sometimes these rather obscure locations aren't the best, obviously, for cell service for live streams, but I like to push the envelope, because when it works, it's glorious. Otherwise, I'll just upload later for y'all. Look at this. We come around this pond here that we actually crossed a little while ago. There's a great reveal that I like of the back of the temple. Margaret is seeing the silver lining. She says, I'm using the buffering period to just take in the details, to have a meditative moment. So the backside, remember when there was a larger structure here during the expo? I have some images of that. So this is the back. Sorry, that's the wrong one. It's the wrong one. What I wanted to show you is that. So do you see that it had a terrace, and they would put tables out there because it acted as a tea room. And you would have tea during the expo looking out onto the pond, as it were, with the lily pads and the flowers and whatnot. And then this is another image of some folks on the terrace itself. terrace and pots are long gone. So we've got bamboo to the right. And then a very odd thing here that I really didn't want to forget to show you. Can you make that out? Where this very furry, I never found out the name of it, but a very furry trunk kind of vine thing. I thought that was pretty spectacular. Am I allowed to touch it? I don't know. Feels almost like a soft kind of pine needle. So I'm glad I didn't forget to show you that. Ricky Beltran for the super chat. Ricky says, appreciate all the work behind these tours. Thank you. I love that it's appreciated. It's certainly a labor of love. Got a few more things to show you on the public video before we switch to the tour extension for the patrons. I wanted to offer up another view. Onward. Right here we're coming up on what used to be the pavilion of Tunisia, undergoing a big renovation. Let me show you some other angles of it. See the pavilion? If I can quite vast. And there would be a market in here, among other things. And Tunisians literally living nearby, as were the Laotians, as were the Cambodians, the Vietnamese, at least 6 months of this expo. And then there was a bazaar, there was a marketplace. So you could find the most beautiful oriental rugs and colored silks, textiles, coffee, spices, olive oils, honey, wines. Pavilion. Building, and I think really makes you think about, how did the French view this site? Because I've read articles years ago where they said that the French were very embarrassed by this site because of everything I talked about with the human zoo aspect. That the French just forget about it, and it never happened. But now the fact that things are being, and it's families and it's birthday parties, and people use that as a nice little say without is turning as far as the local opinion of this area. It's being reclaimed in a way, and I'm sure when this is done and restored, it'll be used for something really. This is very modern. Just a little squirrel that an artist named Tom apparently installed here. I know nothing about it, but it's cute. Thank you, dear Nancy Brisson, for sending that super chat. Nancy's either sending that for the squirrel or for me. Either way, I'll take it. Elizabeth in a park. I mean, it's really quite striking when you come up in this for the first time. I'm going to talk about that thing in a moment, but I just wanted, this view is money. We'll talk about that building in a moment. This right here is called meaning greenhouse. So this would have all been glass. Glass there and all glass along there. And it was originally World Fair. The World's Fair, turn of the century, one of the most famous ones right there, Trocadero. And then they repurposed it here for 7. It was part by African village that was installed during this expo. And it's like items that were put in the ground near it, and so that was the sort of Congo of the, and of course that was the heyday. You don't get quite the same vibe, but it's still, historically speaking, very interesting to see it. I'll show you as well. I like this too. Huh? How about chilling out there in that little seat? It's raining again on me. I did not at all expect rain today. This is the picture of Indochina. Perhaps you can see it written up. It was one of the winter of 1906. So the first room you had, they were growing rice inside and herbs and edible plants and medicinal plants with a big skylight that I'll show you in a minute. And then the second room was full of display cases for plants and insects and textiles and jewelry and furniture. So today, these are a couple images that I was in there the other day. That's the first room. But you can see that big skylight was literally designed for growing rice and other tropical type plants within the space. This is the other room, which today just happens to have a few panels. But what they do, I asked the guys inside, the city uses this as an event space. So it could be exhibitions, it could be displays of various things, or sometimes theater troupes are allowed to use the space to put on theater productions. So it is, again, one of those things that was part of this rather ill-famed World Expo, but has been completely redone and reclaimed by the locals and used for something good. Let me show you the flowers here. I know it's we don't have a lot of good sunlight, but so the Pavilion of Indochina. Those actually even the flowers I want. These beauties. Someone's with these. Let me zoom in a little. Very unique. Love this view too. Wow, again, another can't believe I'm in Paris type of moment. Thank you, Camilla, for those kind. People definitely deal with buffering more so on this episode than previous ones. So don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. Make sure that you get a decent replay. It's been clear. So you won't miss anything. A little bit of satisfaction on it. This won't be pretty. Not exactly the glory days. From looks pretty great. Look at this one. I like we can see the the dome of the Tunisian pavilion. Say the weather itself is starting to feel rather tropical. So I think we're going to wrap up the public version of this tour, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for sticking through the buffering. Got a lot of rain in my face at the moment. Some modern art. And then we'll finish with one last view of this one. So the enthusiasm and the support for these colonial expos started to wane even in 1907. And the idea wouldn't last long. The final expo of this sort in 1930 in Paris, and already by then there were a lot of very vocal critics. And so by the end of World War II, the idea of putting the indigenous people on display like this was largely denounced and just declared inhumane, and so it was officially made not part of the philosophy of France. And they said we should all be treated equally, all of our families across the empire are equal, and so let's not do that anymore. So certainly not something you'll see now. But it's up to you, I think, whether you want to see this space as something dark and evil, or something something a little bit different. Certainly it's a place of discovery, and nowadays I see everybody here with a smile on their face, just enjoying nature and enjoying the visuals and repurposing the whole thing. So I want to thank you all. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you can come see this yourself one day if you're interested in that. And I'm going to sign off here. I won't drag it out. If you are a patron, a Patreon supporter, we're going to hop over to Facebook, as we always do, in the Cafe Chats group in about 5 minutes time, and we're going to extend this walk and try to avoid some buffering. So please do that. And if you're not a Patreon member yet, you can support me. It's a great way to do that and get access to extensions of most of these tours. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye from the Bois de Vincennes and the Garden of Tropical Agronomy, and I will see you for episode 90, probably in a week's time. Take care, and give me a little bit of time, and if the replay's bad, I will upload a nice hard copy that's clear and crisp. I'll check that out when I get back home. Take care, everybody, and patrons, I'll see you in about 5 minutes over in Facebook. Take care. Bye-bye.